Well, hello again, everybody. This is Mike Levin. Thank you for joining us once again for another great discussion. I am so looking forward to this one, given all the news around spent nuclear fuel, the recent news with the creation of our Spent Nuclear Fuel Caucus and so much else. We've got a great guest, and I'm looking forward to answering your questions, and I know he is as well. And I want to first introduce him. I also want to provide a quick update on COVID in our region, and then share just a few other things regarding our work for you in Congress. With us today is Greg Jaczko, former Nuclear Regulatory Commission chairman and the co-chair of our San Onofre Nuclear Generating Station Task Force. Greg served as a chairman of the NRC from 2009 to 2012, and as a commissioner from 2005 to 2009. As the chairman, he played a lead role in the American government's response to the Fukushima nuclear accident in Japan. Greg is now an adjunct professor at Princeton University and Georgetown University, and an entrepreneur with a clean energy development company. He is also an author of a book that was released just before the pandemic, Confessions of a Rogue Nuclear Regulator. You can get it by going to Simon & Schuster's website or at your favorite bookstore, whether in person or online. It's a great read. I highly recommend it. And I'm really grateful to Greg for his continued leadership and friendship. Thank you so much for joining us today, Greg.
Well, thanks. Well, it's a pleasure to be on the call.
Well, before I turn it over to you for some opening remarks, I want to share the latest numbers on COVID-19. And particularly, we are concerned about some of what we're seeing, although we've made incredible progress, as I think everyone knows, since we started these virtual discussions right at the beginning of the pandemic. We have seen 609,000 Americans who've lost their lives from COVID-19. It's really just incredibly heartbreaking. So many people, friends of mine, supporters of ours that we've known that have gotten very sick, in a handful of cases have passed away. It really is just such a heartbreaking tragedy for our nation. We do see a light at the end of the tunnel, and we know from the overwhelming science that we have to continue to follow the guidance of the CDC, and please get vaccinated. If even one person that's listening to this gets vaccinated as a result, I will be incredibly happy about that. In terms of vaccinations, we've got 69.2% of San Diego County now fully vaccinated. That is a great number. So we're rapidly approaching 70% that many experts believe sort of the baseline for what's needed for herd immunity. Now 63.7% fully vaccinated in Orange County. Of course, that's the population over 12 years old, both San Diego and Orange. So 69.2 in San Diego, 63.7 in Orange, 61.7 in California, which is pretty good, but still a way to go. And 57.1% in the United States are fully vaccinated. So we've made great progress. We have to keep going. And it's especially an important thing as we see a troubling uptick in the Delta variant here in Southern California. So please take care of yourself, take care of your neighbors, go get your vaccine if you haven't done so as soon as you can. I am incredibly proud of how we have delivered for the people. The Biden administration, working with the Democrats in Congress on the American Rescue Plan. We've seen a rollout of critical relief into Americans' pockets. We've seen over 160 million Americans fully vaccinated, and now we have the expanded Biden Child Tax Credit. Last week, you might be aware that the first monthly payments of the Biden Child Tax Credit were sent out. In our district alone, really a stunning number, 124,800 children will benefit from advanced monthly payments. That's 68.9% of all children in California 49. And just the same, it means lifting about 10,300 children in California's 49th district, our district, out of poverty. That is a very big deal, and something that I'm very proud of, that working with the Biden administration, Democrats are delivering for the people. And of course, I'm proud of our success in getting people back to work and on the job. As I think we all know, the COVID-19 pandemic led to a devastating loss of millions of jobs. We're about 6 months in to President Biden's term, and we've created more than 3 million jobs. It's been a remarkable turnaround, and I think we're well on our way towards full employment. On that note, I have a couple updates on legislative progress since our last virtual town hall. I recently reintroduced our Bipartisan Commitment to Veteran Support and Outreach Act, or CVSO Act. That bill authorizes federal funding for county veteran service officers who are often the best resource to help our veterans and their families to understand all the different programs that they might be able to have at their disposal, to help file benefit claims and to help represent our veterans in VA hearings. I was also thrilled to announce that we recently secured more than $22 million in House government spending legislation for 9 different projects throughout the district in North County, San Diego, and in South Orange County. Funding for 3 projects will help secure coastal bluffs and prevent further erosion, including more than $9.3 million to begin construction on the San Clemente Shoreline Protection Project. The legislation provides funding for several other local infrastructure and transportation projects, including $5 million for the Barrio Street Lighting and Traffic Circles Project in Carlsbad, almost $1.9 million for the Doheny Village Connectivity Improvement Project in Dana Point, and $1.7 million for the North County Transit District to transition to hydrogen fuel cell electric buses. The bill also includes funding to purchase vehicle cameras for the Oceanside Police Department, to develop a new 50-bed homeless shelter in Oceanside, and to provide literacy programs for underserved children through the Oceanside Museum of Art. As I think everybody knows, my top focus is to deliver real results on our local priorities, and I'm so proud to have achieved this much needed funding that will address some of the challenges that our district faces. Among the local priorities that I also am working on very hard that we're going to be discussing today are the challenges around spent nuclear fuel at San Onofre. One of the reasons that we're here today is that just this week, I proudly announced the formation of a bipartisan spent nuclear fuel solutions caucus in the House of Representatives with my good friend, the Republican from Illinois, Rodney Davis. That effort, that caucus, came as a direct result of the input provided by our San Onofre task force that was co-chaired by the guest you're going to hear in just a bit. They came up with 8 federal recommendations for us, along with a lot of other recommendations, but 8 with a direct federal nexus. We are moving forward on all 8, including the creation of a spent fuel caucus in the House of Representatives. So as most of you know, our district is home to the San Onofre Nuclear Generating Station, which stopped producing electricity in 2012. It currently stores 1,600 tons of spent nuclear fuel just 100 feet from the Pacific Ocean, near active earthquake fault lines, and with more than 9 million people living within 50 miles of the facility. While the environment around San Onofre is unique, the challenges surrounding the spent nuclear fuel located there are not. As I have said, they are symptomatic of a bigger problem. Bigger problem being we've got nowhere to send any of the nation's spent nuclear fuel. There are approximately 80 locations in 34 states across the country where spent nuclear fuel is stored after it's removed from a commercial nuclear reactor. Additionally, 25 of these sites are co-located with nuclear power plants that are no longer in use, some of which have been even completely dismantled. The current system of spent nuclear fuel storage is not sustainable, particularly for sites that no longer have operating reactors and could be redeveloped for other beneficial uses. It's also a violation of the promise codified decades ago that the federal government would take title to the waste in return for ratepayers' contributions to the Nuclear Waste Fund. Because of this, the goal and formation of the Spent Nuclear Fuel Solutions Caucus will seek to address the challenges associated with stranded commercial nuclear spent fuel across the country. It's a forum for members who care about this issue and solving the issue, and where we can come together to make progress regardless of whether or not we agree on all aspects of the challenge. It's my great hope that the Spent Nuclear Fuel Solutions Caucus will serve as a foundation and a conversational starting point for all the members of the House, like myself, who care deeply about solving commercial spent fuel issues on behalf of our constituents, our nation, and our planet. So I'm optimistic that we can make bipartisan strides, that we can find real solutions for the disposal and the safe storage of spent nuclear fuel across the country. So please, if you have a Twitter account, so do we, at the Spent Fuel Caucus. In fact, that is the Twitter handle, at Spent Fuel Caucus. So give us a follow. You can stay up to date on our progress. And as some of our viewers may know, Greg Yasko has been involved since really the beginning of my service in Congress, even before many years working with our community, trying to address the challenges at San Onofre and trying to figure out the nation's spent nuclear fuel issues. I am thrilled that he agreed to give up a lot of time over the last 3 years as the co-chair, along with Len Herring, Admiral Len Herring, of our SONGS task force. But that work has made a tremendous difference. His book also is a real eye-opener and has made a great deal of difference in my thinking about nuclear power, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, and I very much hope that everyone reads it if they haven't done so. With that, Greg, I'd love to hear some opening words from you, my friend. The floor is yours.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that, and I appreciate all your kind words. I'm glad to always do things in Southern California. I wish we could move away from virtual. That'd be nice to get out there more and do a little surfing too.
We'll do it. You're always welcome. You know that.
Thank you. No, it's great, and it's really a pleasure to be able to work with you and your staff on these issues. And you've touched on really one of the most important issues that really we face with energy and climate and all of these, and that's what do we do about nuclear power, and then fundamentally what do we do about the waste that we've generated. And I think it's amazing that to this day we really have not solved this problem in this country. We have ideas, we have technical solutions, we have some political solutions, but we don't really have anything yet that puts it all together. So first of all, I think it's great to see that you've created the caucus, because as you and I have talked about in the past, that what is really missing on this issue is leadership, and having people that really dedicate their time and effort to solving this, because it is certainly a very acute issue in your district, but it's an issue all over the country. We have 60 some nuclear reactor sites, and all of those sites have nuclear waste. And at this point, there's no solution for where that waste goes. So and it's also a very interesting topic to work on, because it's an issue that has technical challenges, it has political challenges, and it has policy challenges. So to get to solutions, it's really going to take a concerted effort among all really different elements of U.S. society, as well as community support, because at the end of the day, that's really how we're going to get this solved, is by communities all over the country engaging in meaningful dialogue with government, with academics, with the industry, to come up with optimal solutions. So perhaps I'll leave it there and leave it for questions on some of these topics.
Well, thank you so much. I have a few questions for you myself before we turn to our audience questions. We got several from the audience. And I want to really dig into some of the things you raise in the book, and you speak from just a great deal of experience on the Hill and at the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. It is clear that the NRC needs major reform. So the question is, what reforms do you think we need to see within NRC to ensure the agency is effective and serves the best interests of the American people?
I think the number one reform that's needed is a much different focus on selection of commissioners to the NRC. I'm a firm believer, as I said, that leadership matters, and leadership at the top is extremely important. And right now, for really the last decade or decade and a half, or really almost 2 decades, the leadership, which is selected through a political process, through the presidential nomination and Senate confirmation, has really been focused or heavily leaning towards commissioners who I would say are more concerned about the fate of the industry than in public health and safety. And it's not to say they're disregarding public health and safety, but they keep kind of one foot in the water on how do all these things that are done impact the industry. And it's certainly a responsibility, but I don't think it should be front and center in the decision making. And I think changing that tone with a different really focus on who is a good candidate to be a commissioner would make a huge difference, because with so many organizations, I worked with amazing people at the NRC who want to do the right thing, but after years and years of seeing decisions that they made get reversed at the senior levels of the agency because they thought that the commission was not going to support something. People, they start to adapt and they figure out, okay, well, I'm not going to say this because if I say this, I know it's never going to get supported. And, and everybody, they're human and they do those kinds of things. And, I just think it really fundamentally comes down to just a change in focus of the leadership to really go back to the mission, which is about protecting public health and safety and engaging the community and serving these communities throughout the country that have nuclear power plants that deal with nuclear waste or other nuclear material.
So public health and safety, community engagement, serving the people rather than serving the nuclear industry exclusively. All of that sounds pretty good to me. As we consider nuclear power generally, there are these competing interests. Obviously, we are all alarmed by the climate crisis and are of the firm belief that it is imperative that we take bold action to reduce our greenhouse gas footprint. As you know, our existing nuclear power fleet makes up almost half of our zero emission renewable, not non-renewable electricity. I won't call it a renewable resource because it's not, but you have about 45% of all of our so-called clean electricity coming from nuclear. So on the one hand, it's needed perhaps to hit our Paris goals or our, even the new Biden goals that we're expecting to see as part of this Build Back Better agenda. But then on the other side, you've got this awful challenge with our legacy fission plants of spent nuclear fuel. So I guess as you're thinking about this, having worked on it for decades, I guess, how do you in your own mind weigh these competing issues when you think about nuclear power?
Yeah, they are tough issues, and there's a lot of I think you can have lots of different ideas about what the right solution is. So what I try to do is avoid the question, and right now, I'm firmly in the camp that there are alternatives. There are renewables have come down in prices dramatically. Battery storage is becoming a more viable solution. I in fact saw yesterday an article about a Massachusetts startup company that has developed a very inexpensive battery storage system that they think will be ready by 2025 and will actually kind of solve the battery storage problem, which is long duration over multi-day battery storage. So the way I look at it right now, I think there are alternatives to nuclear that are carbon free and can meet the needs of kind of the role that nuclear plays. Obviously, that transition will take some time. We have 90 some nuclear reactors in this country, and I think those will slowly phase out. And they're, as long as their output is replaced by carbon-free electricity, which right now is really a cost-neutral choice, I think we can manage without it, in the long term. There are advanced reactor designs that people are proposing. I'm pretty skeptical about a lot of those. I think the time to get those deployed in a meaningful way for climate is probably too long now. It's probably, I guess, as the expression goes, a day late, or that's work that probably needed to be done 10, 15 years ago. Because right now, as the climate crisis demands, we need to get to net electricity production, by 2035, really at the latest. And so that's not really a long time for kind of advanced nuclear reactor concepts. So I think, we'll keep a portion of the fleet we have. We'll operate for a little while, but I'm pretty hopeful that we'll get to, that there are replacements ready to go that can do this. And of course, as the fleet goes down, then the nuclear waste problem gets less challenging in the future. But, if we didn't have these cheaper alternatives, then I think it is a much more difficult question. Which is the greater hazard? Is it the challenges from spent nuclear fuel or the devastation from climate change? And I think those are very, very difficult questions to answer definitively.
Well, that's well said. I like you, I saw the announcement about Form Energy and what they're trying to do with the new type of batteries. And we need all that sort of innovation that we can get, because we're trying to bring a massive amount of new renewable solar and wind onto the grid. We are going to need significant utility scale storage. And if we can figure out the battery issues, both the scalability and then also the sourcing, Certainly need to think about where we're going to get all this lithium and all the other materials necessary for electrification of transportation as well. So very exciting to hear about the battery breakthrough. Look forward to seeing it scale, and operating at scale will really be a big deal. I wanted to turn to another very difficult question, which is the disposition of our spent nuclear fuel. And as you know, this will be, Greg, really the focus of our work, both continued work on the task force at San Onofre, as well as the work of the Spent Nuclear Fuel Caucus. In fact, I think one of the obvious conclusions of the task force was that the waste at San Onofre and the fact that we can't move it off the coast is just a symptom. The problem is we've got nowhere to move it to, and that's what we're trying to figure out now. Most of the discussion about how to permanently dispose of our nuclear waste has been focused on a single national deep geologic repository. Do you think that is the optimal solution, or do you think we should be considering other options like horizontal drilling, borehole technology, reprocessing of the waste, which you briefly did refer to for use in other perhaps small modular reactors, or should we be considering something else like multiple permanent repositories throughout the country?
Yeah, I think the answer to that is really yes, all of them. I think at this point, to solve this problem, we have to go back to the beginning. And a lot of what we do today in spent nuclear fuel goes back to the 50s and the 60s when, sorry, apologize for that.
That's all right. Ask them if they know the solution to the nation's spent nuclear fuel challenge.
It's my wife, so I think she avoids that issue. She married me, so that was enough. She said that's enough.
There you go.
That's all I need to know. But I think this where we are today is really driven by decisions that were made decades ago, and a lot of that was, to find a single repository, or in fact, the original legislative framework was actually for two repositories, one in the eastern part of the US, one in the western, and then for political considerations, they dumped the eastern, and then we were left with a western one. And that was kind of the start of really the politicization of the process. But technologies like deep borehole disposal are very different today than they were 3 or 4 decades ago, and may provide a simpler approach to disposing of the fuel. I mean, they have their own challenges, and all of these things would need to be analyzed. But I think, we really have to go back to the start of this issue and really start with a blank sheet of paper and look at ideas, beyond just this focus on a single national repository. Maybe it's regional repositories, or maybe it's more focus on interim storage, or some sites will have at reactor storage. Clearly, a site like San Onofre is not at all ideal for that. There might be places in the country where a site is okay for interim storage for some time. So I think it's really a combination of all things. But the more that the solution is seen to be as one solution, which is a national repository, I think the more intractable the problem is. And because then everybody looks around and says, I don't want that repository near me. I don't want it in my state. I don't want it in my community. And so I think the more we can move away from that singular focus, the more likely we'll be able to solve this, whether it's with a singular or a national repository, or like you said, some combination of repositories. The one thing I'll say is, I think with where we are with the fate of the nuclear fleet, I do think reprocessing probably doesn't make a lot of sense anymore, that we just don't have enough reactors to really support the infrastructure and the cost that a reprocessing program would require. And of course, the non-proliferation impacts that you get when you start separating out things that could be used for nuclear weapons. So I think that's probably at the bottom of the list of all the things that could be tried. But I do think, and I think hopefully these will be things that the caucus will really take a look at and start talking about things other than just a national repository, because clearly that has been a difficult solution to accomplish.
Well, thank you for that. We've got several questions from constituents. We'll get to as many as we can. And for many of these, Greg, I'll let you take a first crack at the answers. We're fortunate to have a true expert here. And I have learned just a ton from him over the years. But John in Oceanside has a really simple one. It's a really simple question with a difficult answer. He asks, what do both of you see as the biggest barriers to actually moving the waste away from San Onofre?
Well, yeah, I think as you said in the lead-in, is having a place to move it to. I mean, that's really the fundamental challenge is where can you move it? And there are places you could move it to today, and or at least technically suitable where you could move it, but those sites don't have permitting, they don't have licensing, they don't have you don't have site control, all those kinds of challenges. So I think the number one issue is really identifying a place, whether it's some type of local storage facility that's away from the coast, whether it is some type of interim storage facility somewhere, or a national repository or a local repository. All of these kinds of things. I think that is the fundamental issue, is finding another place that you can't move it until it has somewhere to go.
Well, I think that's well said. And, all I would add is that if we, in fact, are moving towards a new national repository or repositories, that's going to take time. And when you look at the reactor sites, many of those sites, the canisters that are there, they were not designed to be there in perpetuity. And we're going to need to move them away from those reactor sites, particularly those that have high environmental risk, such as at San Onofre. So just thinking about Yucca Mountain in Nevada, it took a number of decades between the selection, the licensing, the permitting, the design, the construction to get Yucca Mountain from where it was in 1987 to where eventually it became in 2009 before it was closed. So, and that was with a lot of technical problems that they faced. So even in a perfect world, Greg, if you were to have another repository somewhere, and let's say you went through the consent-based siting, you got the buy-in, you move forward, it's going to take time, a long time, whether one or more sites. So at the same time, you need to be working on interim solutions as well, because the current disposition of the waste at reactor sites, particularly reactor sites near densely populated areas, is just not something we can continue to allow. So that's why you got to work on all of it all at once, and we have to go fast. And it's an issue where our current situation, the mess that we're in, it took a long time to get from where all these reactors were built, the waste was generated. The waste now sits at most of these reactor sites, as we've been discussing. It took decades and decades for that to happen. It's going to take some time to fix this mess. But that doesn't mean that we should just punt because it's a hard problem. We've got to dig in. That's why we've created this caucus to take on the hard issues. And this is one of the hardest ones we face. So we're going to keep at it. We're going to keep at it. Susan in San Clemente writes, how long do you think it will take to remove all the nuclear material from San Onofre? Greg, you want to take a stab at that?
Sure. I think the shortest time frame is a couple of years. If you could identify a local site, I know there's all, and I don't want to reintroduce the issue of things like the Mesa, but if there are sites somewhere perhaps within California that are more viable, that could be identified, the process of licensing a local site like that can take a couple of years, moving the fuel over the course of a year. So the earliest you could see some type of movement is if the will is there, and if Edison decides they want to do, there's nothing stopping Edison from doing that. It could be done in the course of a couple of years. More likely, it's with everything as it is now, it's probably a decade at least, if not longer. But it's certainly something that can be done quickly if the will is there to do it, and especially if you're talking about something specifically for San Onofre, which is certainly possible. Again, going back to this idea, we don't have to have a national repository for everything or a consolidated interim storage for all waste. There can be alternatives simply for the San Onofre material.
Well, according to Southern California Edison's own decommissioning plan, the earliest we could expect to finish transferring the fuel off-site is 2049. Trying to think how old I'll be in 2049. That's kind of a scary thought. That's once they finished all decommissioning work, allowing all of the most recent waste to sufficiently cool, establishing a storage location. So that's 2049. That is, in my mind, that is way too long. And we've got to do everything we can to accelerate that time frame, because, the canisters, the warranty on the canisters is not sufficient. And those canisters are only expected to last for so long. We really don't know exactly what the impact of being in that coastal environment is on those canisters. So we do not want to keep them there until 2049 for sure. Julia in Carlsbad says, and this is more for me, Greg, she says, a congressional caucus sounds good, but it also seems like we have a lot of groups dedicated to talking about this issue. Why are you confident that this caucus can make real progress? Well, you're right. There are a number of groups that are focused on the issue. The caucus is different in that it's the first of its kind in Congress. So you create caucuses in Congress for a variety of purposes, but generally is to foment dialogue, discussion, to bring people together around issues of mutual concern, to try to develop solutions, to bring legislation, to try to form coalitions. So that's what we're doing with this caucus. And I'm really excited because this was an idea that came directly from the task force that Greg and Admiral Herring co-chaired, where we asked them, what does the federal government, based on all the knowledge, all the understanding of the challenges at San Onofre, what do we need to do? And the federal government needs to lead, and the Congress needs to lead. And one of the ways to do that is within a caucus. So that's where this is different than many of the other community organizations and others that are trying to work on the issue. We are exclusively talking about members of Congress working across the aisle to try to get things done. And we'll be informed by many of those community organizations out there. Kai in Encinitas asks, are there any contamination risks for our local waters associated with the process of moving the nuclear material off San Onofre? Any other challenges we should worry about for when the waste is being transported? Greg, you want to speak to that?
Sure. There's not huge risks to contamination of the shore or the waters, let's say, from if you're transporting the fuel. I mean, the bigger risks, they are there. They're low risks that if you had a canister that was being transported and somehow got into an accident, the biggest concern is that you get a fire, really, because you basically need a lot of energy to release the material from the canisters and kind of get it into the atmosphere where it could move somewhere. But the best way really to protect the waters around the plant is to move the fuel, and so that is really the optimal thing to do. And there are certainly, as I said, there are hazards and risks associated with transportation, and it's one of these issues. This goes back to the time when I was on the commission. Is one of these simple issues that the commission gets itself kind of wrapped around itself on, and one of the issues that I and another commissioner were pushing, and this was back in 2005, 2006, was that they take the prototype canisters, or we require that whatever canisters are going to transport this fuel basically be subjected to a fire, so you could see how they would perform and how the canisters would behave, because that's really the biggest concern you have with these canisters during transportation. And there was a lot of reluctance to do that. People wanted to rely on computer models or simulations. And the reality is you do those things when you can't actually perform the real thing. But you can take a canister and a prototype canister, and as you get to the point where they exist and they're used, before it gets certified, you should set it, put it in and burn it and see what happens. And and you can do those kinds of things to build confidence in the transportation, to really look at what's really going to happen to a canister in this situation. And that's just one of kind of the weaknesses in the system that exists, is this reluctance to want to just do these common sense things in the way that people expect them to be done. So that's the kind of hazard you face, and it's certainly lower risk, and as I said, better to move it than leave it there, certainly long term.
Well, I think bureaucracy and common sense don't always go hand in hand, but what can I say? Maria in Lucadia asks another easy one. Where do you think the waste will go? What happens if we can't find a community willing to accept the waste? Will it stay in San Onofre? Greg, you want to start?
Yeah, well, I'm optimistic actually on this front. I mean, I do think that communities will come forward ultimately to take at least a portion of the nuclear waste. And I think, again, if we start to think about this not as this need to have a single national repository, I do think you can start to look at solutions that become more palatable. So in that sense, I am optimistic. And from a pragmatic perspective, the waste simply cannot stay there. It's never going to be licensed to stay permanently in that location, and it can't be. It will never be a long-term viable place. So at some point, it will have to be moved. And hopefully that is done in a reasonable time frame, and it's done before there's any significant contamination that could impact the area. But I do think that there will be communities ultimately that do want to take waste, and I think that is easier if you're looking at multiple locations rather than a single repository. And people often talk about Finland and Sweden as models for countries that have solved the nuclear waste problem, if you will, and they found repositories. And one of the things that I remind people is that those are typically, they have much smaller nuclear programs. So I think when you start to take this and look at this problem on a smaller scale, then it's an easier solution than it is when you're looking at all of the country's nuclear waste. And so I think if we start to look at it in that piecemeal way, that it's more likely we'll find solutions and find the communities that are comfortable with the material and willing to accept it, and there are economic value benefits to that and all those kinds of things. So I'm optimistic that that's what's going to happen. And I can't give you a time frame. I wish I could, but I think it will.
One of the things I'm proud of is that last year we got over $20 million for the Department of Energy to move forward with a request for information for communities that are potentially interested in consolidated interim storage. So that request for information is going to be out on the street later this summer or perhaps in the early fall. Now, what I have encountered from a lot of different communities is that they're interested maybe in the economic opportunity of being an interim storage site if there is a permanent repository in the works or repositories in the works. But in the absence of that, these communities don't want to get stuck as the permanent repository. So hopefully we can give them the confidence, give their community the confidence that we're moving forward in parallel path with the interim and permanent sites. Greg, one thing that would be helpful, I think, for our audience that is important, it's an important consideration in all of this, is the jurisdiction between the DOE, the Department of Energy, and the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. Now, you ran the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. Do you want to take just a minute and explain which has jurisdiction over what as it pertains to nuclear power and spent nuclear fuel?
Sure. It's so the Nuclear Regulatory Commission is solely charged with regulating the safety of nuclear power, nuclear materials. The Department of Energy has the responsibility to promote nuclear energy if they see it as a viable energy source, and then they also have and this is probably the more challenging element of their responsibility. They also have the responsibility to design and construct and operate a repository, and that action has to ultimately be regulated by the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. So it's kind of a unique government regulating another government entity. And personally, I think it's in many ways a disastrous approach, but there's really nobody else to do the regulation. So it has to be the NRC. But the other agency I'd throw in that when it gets to transportation, it's actually the Department of Transportation that has the primary authority for safety of transportation. And so when you're looking at the transportation of materials, the NRC this is where it gets complicated. The Department of Energy has to basically do the transporting under current law. The the NRC would license the cast, and then the Department of Transportation would essentially license the transportation aspects of that. So that one gets a little more complicated when you start moving it around.
Now, thank you for that, because I think it's an important clarification for our audience. One of the recommendations of the task force was to review the potential creation of a new nuclear waste administration, which would, because of the complex relationships you just mentioned, would hopefully clarify and centralize the regulatory authority over the nation's spent nuclear fuel. By the way, you can see our report. You can go online and find our report if you're interested in that. But Greg, do you want to speak for just a little while about the idea of creating a new nuclear waste administration that would solely be responsible for this challenge?
Yeah, I think the idea behind this is to take this responsibility out of the Department of Energy, because the Department of Energy has a lot of things that it does. I mean, people often don't realize, but the Department of Energy, more than half of what the bulk of what the Department of Energy actually does is manage the development and design of nuclear weapons, and they manage a number of labs to do that, and it's a huge portion of their budget. Then they have all these myriad responsibilities on essentially helping to stimulate new energy technologies and support the development of those technologies and manage labs and do all these things. And so the spent nuclear issue is almost, in many ways, kind of an orphan issue within the department. And so by creating a new entity, you would have some federal agency that's solely focused on this issue of addressing spent nuclear fuel and disposing of it. You would still, if they did repositories or built repositories, want to see that regulated by the NRC. But ultimately, it would be an agency who's got a primary focus, because right now, there is no longer an office within the Department of Energy that is focused on spent fuel. That mission has been subsumed into the Office of Nuclear Energy, and it's much more fun to talk about building new reactor designs and all those kinds of things, and trying to figure out the very difficult problem of spent nuclear fuel. So you can imagine where the focus is and where people want to work if they have a choice in the Department of Energy.
Well, and a lot of those roles have yet to be filled in the Biden administration as well. I was just looking the other day, and there's still a lot of roles to fill. So hopefully that will happen soon. Now on to one of the most important questions in our community, Greg. As you know, this is a community that loves surfing, loves our beaches. And Alana in San Clemente asks, would the removal of nuclear material require shutting down San O to surfers?
Well, no, certainly removing the waste wouldn't do that. And as I said, the best thing ultimately right. So yeah, that was that definitely would not require the shutting down of the beaches. Sorry, I can't vouch for sharks or anything like that, but that's
Well, that is good. That is good. And I would say the contrary. It'd make our beaches safer for surfers. Mitigate the risk for any sort of contamination or anything like that. And I think we're excited. The World Surf League Championships are coming to San Clemente.
Oh, wow.
So that's going to be great, and it just means a tremendous amount to our local culture. So, and oh, by the way, our economy, the ocean economy, our coastal economy, about 140,000 jobs in our region directly tied to our oceans and our beaches. And, that's another reason we can't have any more drilling off our coast. That's another topic for another day. But our beaches consistently score pretty well in terms of water quality. We need to keep it that way. And part of that means we get that waste off the coast as quickly and as safely as we can. Here's another one from Derek in Ladera Ranch. Great question, Derek. Where will the funds come from to transport the nuclear material? Will there be any costs for local taxpayers? So again, Derek's question presumes we find somewhere to send the waste. Greg, are local taxpayers on the hook for that?
No, I mean, right now, the way the law is structured, the Department of Energy would be responsible, and the funds for that come from a fee that has been collected by the companies that produce nuclear power. Now, you could argue that has impacted the local, the people living around the plants, because in principle, they may have paid a slightly higher electricity bill. to help fund that. But as the law is structured right now, and there's certainly sufficient funds in that already collected to cover certainly the transportation of fuel. So it would not be something that local taxpayers would be paying.
Excellent. We've already been paying for far too long as it is, and the federal government needs to uphold its commitment. So the book is Confessions of a Rogue Nuclear Regulator. It's a great read. It's a quick read as well. A lot in there that certainly will open your eyes when it comes to nuclear power in the United States and around the world. Greg, you are awesome. Thank you so much for joining us. Did you have any final closing thoughts?
No, just, as I said, I'm glad to hear the caucus set up, and I think that's going to be a great forum to really start getting attention on these issues. So I think that's an exciting opportunity to really get going on solving this problem. So and it's a pleasure always to talk to you. And I think I saw your daughter in the background there. And
she likes to Zoom bomb about half my meetings. So, yeah. I just want to make sure that by the time she is our age, that the nuclear waste is no longer on the coast in our beautiful community. But I'm really grateful to you, Greg, for all that you do. And I know that we'll be having you in the months ahead come to speak to the caucus as well. So thanks to everybody, as always, for tuning in. I really want to thank our wonderful staff, our team in Washington, D.C., our tremendous team there, our Chief Kara, Comms Director Eric, our Deputy Chief Jonathan. They're just working so hard. And of course, Kyle in our district office, who's really been point on a lot of these spent nuclear fuel issues. Thanks to everybody for tuning in. Before I go, I want to remind everyone that you can also listen to these town halls and other discussions that I've hosted on our podcast. It's called Listening with Levin, and you can find it on all the major podcasting platforms. To find information about future town halls, you can follow us on social media by using @RepMikeLevin, or you can go to our website and sign up for our newsletter by visiting Mike Levin, that's one word, MIKELEVIN.house.gov. Remember, if you need help with a federal agency or resources from the American Rescue Plan, please contact our office for assistance. We always do our best to resolve your problems or find the information that you need. To open a case with our office and start receiving assistance, please visit our website. Thanks so much, everybody. Take care.